Vladimir Putin, who won the Russian presidential election on March 17, will take office for a fifth term on May 7, 2024 year. According to the federal law on the election of the President of the Russian Federation dated January 10, 2023, the term of office of the elected president begins after 6 years from the date of taking office of the current head of state. In the 2018 year, Vladimir Putin assumed presidential powers on May 7. On March 26, 2000, Vladimir Putin was elected president of Russia for the first time. Since then, at least 70 books and countless articles have been written about him, and he has been called the Man of the Year on a global scale more than once. And in the 2013 and 2014 years, according to the American magazine Forbes, he was recognized as the most influential person in the world. Vladimir Putin is the president of the Russian Federation for 4 terms and the supreme commander-in-chief. Putin has become one of the most famous and influential political figures in recent history. And how it all started. By the end of 1999, the situation in Russia was extremely difficult. In 1998, there was an economic crisis, as economists said at the time, the most severe in Russian history. The government has defaulted, refusing to pay off government debts. The ruble exchange rate has collapsed more than 3 times in a few weeks. All Russian citizens have become impoverished by exactly the same amount because the market of goods and services was completely dependent on supplies from abroad. The country, devastated by the reforms, could not even feed itself. A significant part of the food was purchased abroad. An almost $5 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund, issued to stabilize the economy, disappeared in an unknown direction shortly before the crisis. Prime Minister Sergei Kiriyenko was dismissed by President Boris Yeltsin. It was he who was blamed for the default, although it was much more the result of the long work of the previous head of the Cabinet of Ministers, Viktor Chernomyrdin. Yeltsin, by the way, immediately tried to return Chernomyrdin to his former place, but the State Duma resisted, completely refusing to approve the old prime minister. After long disputes, Yevgeny Primakov, a native of the Soviet Foreign Intelligence Service, who formed the cabinet of ministers actually opposed to the president, became the head of government. In May of the following year, Yeltsin removed Primakov, fearing his independent behavior and growing influence. Sergei Stepashin, a passing figure but loyal to the president, became the new prime minister. However, Stepashin did not sit in a high chair for long either. It soon became clear that his prospects as a politician were close to zero. The people did not see him as a future president. Meanwhile, it was going to the presidential elections that was the main task for the new head of government. After all, the Constitutional Court banned Yeltsin from running for a 3rd term. The presidential entourage then considered the most fantastic options, from the urgent creation of a union state with Belarus, where Yeltsin could count on the post of president, to the restoration of the monarchy or even the cancellation of elections. However, sociological studies have shown that with Yeltsin's incredibly low rating, which is within the statistical margin of error about 3%, any attempts to circumvent the law will be perceived as a coup d'etat. Therefore, it was decided to continue the search for a presidential candidate who would be able to please the people. And such a person was found very quickly. The same sociology suggested that in 1998 the image of Stolitz, a cunning intelligence agent who conducts dangerous work right in the enemy's lair, turned out to be extremely popular among the people. In the ruling elite, even if not in the highest positions, there was a person who was completely unrelated to the bacchanalia that was going on in power in the 90s. Vladimir Putin, a career officer of the State Security Committee of the Soviet Union, who held a post in the City Hall of St. Petersburg in the 90s. He led the election campaign of the first mayor Anatoly Sobchak, and when he lost, he committed an act unimaginable in his honesty. He voluntarily resigned from office, although he was offered to remain in the office of the new governor. After working as a taxi driver for several months, Putin received an invitation to Moscow. There, the head of the control department was required in the presidential administration, a structure where personal honesty was the main requirement. Vladimir Putin's very first actions in the new rank showed that he had seriously taken up corruption in government, which immediately attracted the attention of the press to him. In 1998, Vladimir Putin was transferred to the post of head of the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation. At his new job, he immediately began a major reform, which turned out to be so successful that 25 years later, the Federal Security Service as a whole lives by Putin's rules, established back in 1998. As a result, by the summer of 1999, Putin had a reputation, on the one hand, as an honest man, unblemished in the scandals of the 90s era, and on the other hand, as an effective leader who showed himself well in all positions. On August 9th, President Yeltsin announced the appointment of Vladimir Putin as head of government and, seeing that he could no longer hold power in his hands, actually withdrew from making government decisions. It was clear that in conditions when there is a war going on in the country at the same time and a slow way out of a severe economic crisis continues, only a strong, charismatic leader can hold power. Putin turned out to be just that. The Yeltsin era is over. From the very first days, the new head of government resolutely took up the fight against the terrorist threat. Then Putin's words were heard throughout the country, which brought him incredible popularity. "We will pursue terrorists everywhere." The phrase, "wet in the toilet," became one of the first memes of modern Russian culture. Grozny was taken the following year, after which the active phase of the military campaign ended. The victory was achieved in just over 6 months. Against this background, Boris Yeltsin's resignation was inevitable. The end of 1999 promised to be very interesting. On December 30th, Putin delivered a program article, Russia at the Turn of the Millennium. In it, he clearly outlines the principles of his future program: patriotism, the rejection of mindless borrowing of foreign models of society, a strong state, social solidarity. Putin stated bitterly, "Our country is not among the states today that represent the highest frontiers of the economic and social development of the modern world." His goal was to bridge this economic gap. The tasks of normalizing the country's financial system, curbing inflation, tax reform, eliminating the shadow economy, increasing household incomes, restoring production and agriculture were outlined. All these ideas were received by the society with great enthusiasm. For the first time, the leader did not make abstract promises, like Yeltsin, but named clear indicators and deadlines when they should be achieved. In December 1999, Russian President Boris Yeltsin announced his early retirement from his post and the temporary transfer of powers to Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. On December 31st, Yeltsin announced his early retirement. He was pushed to this by the political situation. There was already a universally recognized leader in the country, and a serious state of health. Everyone who watched the president's New Year's address noted that even a brief speech was difficult for him. Yeltsin said then that he should not interfere with the natural course of history and, for another 6 months, hold on to power when the country has a strong man worthy of being president, with whom today almost every Russian pins his hopes for the future. According to the constitution of the Russian Federation, the chairman of the government immediately became the interim head of state. Early presidential elections were scheduled for March 26, 2000. The election campaign has begun in Russia. The competition was fierce, and very strong rivals participated in the elections. Communist Gennady Zyuganov, who almost defeated Yeltsin in the 1996 elections, Gregory Yavlinsky, the favorite of the liberal community, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, the leader of the LDPR, and other well-known politicians. Only 11 people. At first, there were rumors that the recent Prime Minister Primakov, who was extremely popular among the people, would be nominated, but he calculated his prospects very accurately and voluntarily ceded the leadership to Putin. As soon as the campaign began, political scientists and sociologists began talking about a previously unknown phenomenon, the Putin majority. If earlier Yeltsin did not have a firm support for the majority of voters and voted for him in many ways from the opposite, so that reforms would not be curtailed, so that privatized apartments would not be taken away, so that communists would not come to power. Now it turned out that the majority of the Russian population made a choice and supports Putin. On February 25, Putin's election program appeared in the newspapers. It included 3 main points: the fight against poverty, the protection of the market from crime, and the transformation of foreign policy based on the national interests of Russia. Then the candidate said that the main message of his program sounds very simple: a decent life. When the airtime draw for the televised debates between the candidates took place soon after, Putin refused to participate in them, saying that he was going to prove his program with deeds, not words. On March 26, 2000, the voting day came. The turnout for the elections was 69%. 52.9% of the votes were cast for Vladimir Putin, while his closest rival Gennady Zyuganov scored only 29%. Foreign observers from the US Parliamentary Assembly noted that there were no significant violations in the elections and the voting results are beyond doubt. It was a complete success. Indeed, in the 1996 presidential election, Yeltsin had to compete in the second round, and he won with great difficulty. On May 7, the inauguration ceremony of the second president of Russia took place in the St. Andrews Hall of the Grand Kremlin Palace. About 1,500 people attended the ceremony. 148 deputies of the State Duma, 175 members of the Federation Council, 19 judges of the Constitutional Court of Russia, representatives of the government of the Russian Federation, federal government authorities, the diplomatic corps and heads of diplomatic missions. President Putin took the oath of office on the text of the Constitution of the Russian Federation, after which the first President Yeltsin presented him with the symbol of presidential powers, the regalia of the Order of Merit for the Fatherland. Yeltsin made a short speech, saying words that everyone remembered. From this day, the official countdown of Vladimir Putin's presidency begins. In not just handing him a symbol of presidential power, he gets the main thing, responsibility for the fate of the country, all Russians. Therefore, today I want to wish you, Vladimir Vladimirovich, success and good luck. The Russians remember you, and you will move forward with them. These words are sincere, they come from the very heart, and I can't help it, because it all went through me. Your goal is to justify these hopes, and I want to repeat the words that I once told you. Take care of Russia.